Hello, everyone, and welcome to this year's summer speaker series hosted by Sony Pictures Animation and Asians in Animation. I'm Andrea Kutcher, the Executive Director of Asians in Animation, and I'll be leading today's panel. Sony Animation started this speaker series back in 2021 as a way to provide partner organizations like Asians in Animation with direct access to executives and creatives from SPA, who will be sharing insight and giving you an exclusive look into the various departments at the studio. We are so excited to have partnered with them this year's Summer Speaker Series, which concludes today with our talk on creative development. So today our panel is titled Development in Animation and How to Bring Your Stories to the Screen, which will be an enlightening talk with Sony Pictures Animation creative executives on what the development process is and how you can take your project from an idea to the screen. So if you're among those looking to enter or create your own projects and are wondering how projects are greenlit, you are in the right place. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to introduce or have our panelists introduce themselves. So I'll kick it off to Kevin Noel.
Hey, thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Kevin Noel from Sony Pictures Animation, duh, of course. I am the SVP of Creative, working across both feature films and series in our division. Is that it? Do we say
Yeah,
something else? Or okay,
no, that's
cool.
perfect. That's perfect. We'll dive in deeper.
That's me. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so next up is Kyle Fukuto.
Hey everyone, I'm Kyle. I am an exec here at Sony. I've been here for 5 years now, and I focus mostly in television series, although I work in features as well, but mostly series, which is a newer initiative for us. And yeah, great to be here.
Thanks, Kyle. And last but certainly not least, Chelsea Itaya.
Hey everybody, my name's Chelsea. Nice to meet you. I'm a director of creative at SPA, which is what we call Sony Pictures Animation. And yeah, same as these guys, I work in development, mostly on the feature side and a little bit in series.
Awesome. So for everybody who has just joined us, the structure of our panel today will be, I'll be asking a couple questions to get us started, and are definitely taking some audience questions as well. So there's a Q&A box down at the bottom of the Zoom panel right there. Please direct all your questions that you'd like to ask our wonderful panelists there. If you put them in the chat, they may get lost, so we do ask you to put your questions in the Q&A box. So to get started, I'm going to open it up to all three of you and just kind of if we could go around and talk about how each of you got into the animation industry. And then, of course, how did you get your start in development? So I think I'll start us off with Kevin.
Sure, yeah. I've been in the industry for a while now. I started went to film school in San Francisco at San Francisco State University. Wasn't necessarily a road to figure out how to get in the industry, let alone animation, but had a couple friends, did a bunch of research, talked to people, and it was all about moving to LA and just trying to jump into the business. So I moved to LA. I did the thing where I knocked on every door and just cold called people until somebody gave me a job. My first gig was at a company called Three Arts Entertainment, who is a talent and literary management company that also produces big sort of in the comedy world. And I just basically begged them for a job, and they gave me my first gig, which was working in the mailroom. And this was not to date myself, but this was like at the time when scripts were still being hand delivered. The PDF email thing wasn't as such a big thing. So my first job was really just driving around town, going to producers' houses and agencies and all of that stuff, delivering scripts. It was just sort of a great way to learn the lay of the land in terms of the business. Like I learned a ton in school about actual film production, but I knew nothing about the business, and I just wanted to like break in and have a cool job. So that was my first one. I was there for about 2.5 years. And then how I got into animation was I just kind of fell into it. I became an assistant clients was working on Sony Pictures Animation's first movie, Open Season. So now I'm dating myself again, way back when. And I really wanted to work for a studio. I think that was the next thing for me, is like, how do I get into that? And how do I get into production? I wanted to like go back to my roots and get my hands dirty and actually like make stuff. And I didn't really know what that meant, but that was like sort of the goal in my head. And I was talking to people at Sony Animation every day for a little bit, and they were like, we're building this division at this big studio. You should come hang out. And in my head, I'm not, can't draw. You know, I never thought there was a job for me in animation. You'll hear the story a lot. But what I came to find out is there's so many different areas that you can work, not just in film, but like specific to animation. There's a you know, if you watch the end credits of Spider-Verse, there's 1,000 people. And some of them are animators, some of them are artists, and some of them are production people, technical people. So it just became a thing where I knew that there were plenty of jobs available, and I kind of fell into it. And I was a big cartoon nerd, so that was exciting. And I've sort of been here ever since. And then in terms of getting into creative development, you know, I did 2 stints at Sony Animation. My first was working in production, so that's exactly what I was going for. A lot of nuts and bolts, managing departments and pushing movies through. I left for a short time, and when I came back, my boss, the president of the company, Christine Belson, asked me what I would be interested in doing if I came back. And I said I wanted to learn how to run a movie studio. And, you know, one thing led to another, and they gave me a job to come back to the studio as an executive. And I eventually found my way into development. And that's where I sit now.
Awesome. Kyle, I'm gonna popcorn it to you next.
Okay. Yeah, well, my background is majority in production before I became an executive. I interned in college at Nickelodeon Animation Studio on their development team, and really fell in love with development and just the idea of just like incubating my friends' projects, or just cool people's projects, and trying to get that off the ground and being like a cheerleader, kind of to what Kevin was saying. I'm not a very creative person, or I'm not like, I can't write or draw, and I can kind of read, so that felt like the best like avenue for me. Development and just kind of helping, again, cheerlead people's projects and getting it through the finish line was really cool. But yeah, after that, I had a few production gigs. I worked at Family Guy as a PA, which was like my first job out of college, which was really good way to kind of cut my teeth and just be exposed to so many amazing people. And my life really changed when I interviewed and ended up being on the first Spider-Verse movie. I started as a PA there, and I kind of worked my way up into the script and story department. And it was just amazing to be at a studio like Sony that was just working on so much stuff. I met Kevin when I was there in that stint, and a bunch of other people who I ended up working with now in this stint. So I was there for a couple of years, and luckily a like junior executive position opened up at Nickelodeon. And a lot of my friends that I had made when I was an intern there were kind of rising while I had like this production track. So I was able to make the jump over there, and was at Nickelodeon for a couple of years. We did a shorts program that's still going, called Intergalactic Shorts, which was really fun. It was like a backdoor pilot thing where we were just making just a bunch of really cool originals. Worked on a Rugrats reboot that's released and was doing well for them. There's an original as well called The Middlemost Post that I helped develop, and it was just exciting time to be at that studio. It was kind of a transitional period too for them, so it was fun to kind of felt a little bit like ground floor. But while I was there, Kevin and another one of our colleagues, Katie Barron, formed this TV initiative here at SPA, and I was talking to them about coming home to Sony, and I made the jump back in end of 2019, and I've been here ever since, and it's been really great. Just seeing how much, I mean, the industry has changed so much over the past half decade, but just as far as like where we're at, it's been really inspiring, kind of making this new thing. We haven't done TV shows before, and really trying to get that operation off the ground has been my main focus, and it's been a blast.
Amazing. And Chelsea, tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. I went to UC Berkeley and I studied business there, which does not at all help me in my job today. But I knew I wanted to work in entertainment. I just didn't know what exactly. I had thought at the time I wanted to do marketing. So I was like, oh, marketing is part of business. So I did that. But while I was at Berkeley, this other student I met in the business school had interned at DreamWorks Animation, who used to have an office in Northern California. And she asked if that'd be something I was interested in, and it sounded great to me. So I went and did an internship there in human resources, which I loved working at DreamWorks Animation. Human resources, I found out wasn't exactly what I was interested in. So I went back and I did a second internship in production, and I was on Penguins of Madagascar, and that was so much fun, and I loved it and was just like, this is what I'm gonna do with my life. So I moved to LA and I couldn't get a production job, and I ended up assisting a couple executives at Paramount Animation, and then one of my bosses at Paramount, he wanted to direct, so he went off to direct a movie and asked if I wanted to be in production on that movie. So I did that for a little bit. Similar to, yeah, Kyle and Kevin started out in production and did like the script and story route in production. And then through that, kind of realized that like working with writers is where my real interests lied. And just getting to be in those rooms, figuring out story with writers, and then similarly figuring out story with the storyboard artist was so fun to me. So one of my bosses on the movie I was on, he had been a development exec at Illumination, and he told me kind of what it entailed, and it sounded really interesting. So when I was in Montreal working, and when I moved back to LA, I was determined to get a job at Sony Animation because Spider-Verse had just come out and it was so good, and just everything I had heard about what Sony was working on sounded so cool to me. So I applied and I got to be Kevin Noel's assistant, which was awesome. And I got to be very involved in working on our first TV series, which was really fun because I had never worked in TV before. And then, yeah, I've just worked my way up from there.
Awesome. So kind of listening to everybody's stories, I know Kevin, you've seen it all, series, features, and I know Kyle and Chelsea, you both come from also different series and feature worlds. Are there any differences, big differences that you can share with the group between developing series and features, and what is successful for each, and any hurdles that you recognize for each as well?
I can jump in real quick. There's that's a great question. I think there's differences both in production and in development. I think the schedules once you get into production are so different, and features are just naturally more iterative in terms of how they're made, whereas TVs are really there's these waterfall schedules that are really it forces you to make things quicker in ways. But I will say, as far as the development process side goes, I think the biggest difference between the two is at least for series, there's a big focus on like what the episodic engines are, and understanding that, just the nature of the medium is a little bit more evergreen. There's less, I mean, shows are more serialized, I think, nowadays, especially on streamers. But I think as we conceive these shows, thinking about why people want to tune in week to week, and a lot of that has to do with the character dynamics. Not that that isn't important in features, but I think the sense of finality in features kind of changes the way you look at characters, the way you develop the characters, or the comedic threads or whatever. So I think that's one of the biggest differences, at least from where I sit.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I think the iteration is different on features because you sort of give yourself this long leeway in order to really get the tone of the story you want to tell right. And it's all of those same things you have in series. I think series, you have to think about how this will sustain multiple viewings or just a longer form storytelling and not something that's like so contained. And then also the idea of not knowing where the story would go, whether or not you're developing for one season or two. Um, and to back to the iteration, what's nice about features is you purposely give yourself, at least at Sony, we give ourselves a sort of a lot of runway to test things, try things out, and there's a lot of stepping forward, stepping back to move forward again. Sometimes in series, that's a little bit difficult because once you sort of get the train going, it's just forward momentum. So a lot of the development happens up front, but once you figure out sort of the story you want to tell and sort of build the key um, team, the creative leadership around it, there hits a certain point where you can't really go back the same way you can on features, at least in animation.
I also think because we're developing features for theaters, and the features we're developing, their budgets typically sit around $80 million, and then there's like marketing and publicity on top of that. So it's such a huge investment to ask anybody to make. So that's part of why the development takes a really long time, and can um start and stop many times, like Kevin was mentioning. But I find that in series too, sometimes you can take more creative risks because sometimes the budgets are lower. It depends on the series, but yeah, so in features, there's that theatrical release makes for a very high bar as far as it appealing to mass audiences globally, and many different age ranges and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you know what? Just to put one thing on this further is it's sort of the shifting mentality of what the feature landscape is and what the series landscape is. Especially coming out of the pandemic, theatrical, like Chelsea was saying, the bar is so high. Like, what's going to get people in movie theaters? I think that there's, at least at the moment, where the pendulum, which is always swinging, is. I think it's harder to take chances right now because theatrical is just a different experience for people. They're now, because of the pandemic and because of streaming, people are used to being able to have things piped into their house, right? So what's going to get people to the theaters? It's been really exciting to see things like Inside Out 2 come out, and you're sort of like, okay, that'll do well probably because it's Pixar, and then it became the biggest movie, biggest animated movie of all time. And so that it's nice to have wins like that. But we're still at a time now where it's uncertain. Like obviously that's a sequel, that's a franchise, people have known history with it. So the bar for original animation is even harder. On the flip side of that, people expect high quality television, and they're doing it in animation now. You got things like Arcane, which sort of once it's produced, people now have this expectation of like big, what they call, they refer to as the golden age of TV because there's been Game of Thrones and some of these really, really big shows. So I think people are expecting that, and that's what we're looking to deliver in the series space for animation. So it's sort of like a mentality change of like how people are used to viewing and consuming this material, and so you have to think about that as we go along. But audience changes, and we try to adapt.
Absolutely. Kind of piggybacking off of that is when knowing that your audience has changed, is there anything that stands out to you now when someone makes a pitch for a film or a series? And do you have any tips on good things to do as you're pitching your idea, and any things that you should avoid?
I think.
Yeah.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Kyle.
No, you go.
Um, I was just gonna say, well, I can speak to features, and then maybe you can speak to series or something like that. But on the feature side of things, for that theatrical bar we've been mentioning, something that's really important. Well, I think one of the most important things is comedy. I think a lot of our features sit in that genre, and even if it doesn't, it's still really important for us. Another thing is balancing that comedy with a really emotional character relationship, and then also a world that you've never seen before, or a new point of view on a world that is familiar, and a world that deserves to be up on, a big screen in theaters. It kind of has to earn that theatrical bar in a way. And then as far as what what stands out to you in a pitch, I think also just that personal connection, and why are you the person to be telling this story, and what is your vision for this movie that's fresh and original and unique and cuts through all the everything that's out there now, and will get people out of their houses to go to the theaters.
I
Popcorn.
agree with all that. Yeah, I think really like for me, as far as you get pitched so many things, but the thing that really cuts through is like a strong point of view. And like I don't know, the only thing you can know is yourself. So or try to please yourself. And I feel like when people, as far as things to avoid, when people try to chase trends or chase things that have succeeded before, and it just feels sort of hollow. It just feels like they're again like kind of running over treads that have already been traversed, to use a really messy metaphor. I think that ends up feeling just kind of like a nothing burger, and we're really looking for, to what Chelsea's saying, like worlds we haven't seen before. And to do that, I think you just have to like look inward and see what you respond to. Not that it has to be autobiographical necessarily, but in terms of the types of shows that inspired you, or why are you, the nexus point from all these different influences, and how can you kind of communicate that into something that's special and different?
Yeah, I think the personal connection thing, like you touched on, Chelsea, is so important. To us, we consider ourselves a creator-driven studio, and we really like to find good people, interesting storytellers, and fall in love with their ideas, and hopefully, provide resources and get out of the way and make a good movie or a good series. And I think that because these things are so high stakes and there's a lot of people involved, not just on the movie producing it, but folks at the studio, whether it be marketing or publicity or any of that stuff. Um, so many different thoughts and opinions can come from all these different places. And so if you start at a point where a filmmaker has a very personal connection to the material they want to tell, hopefully that is the North Star for why we're making the story and why we want to tell it with this person. And so that will help guide the way, along the way, as like you can easily lose footing because it's such a big machine. We want to make big event movies, and that usually takes a lot of people. So having a personal having a filmmaker that knows the story they want to tell, and is clear about that from the beginning, is always something that stands out to us, because we know, okay, no matter what happens, we can always go back to this pitch and say, that's why X filmmaker wanted to make Y movie.
Great advice. Awesome, awesome insight for any of those of you who are interested in pitching your own films one day. Um, I know all of you have had great careers in, from start to finish, as you all have described. Is there a favorite part about working in development that has stood out to you and that makes you keep looking forward to the future?
Hmm.
I just want to make cool stuff with cool people. So when I see my friends succeed and make something that's inspiring, like that's why like I got into it from in the first place. So even with like IP, like I think how we look at it, when I say IP, like intellectual property, like established brands, I feel like we come at it where we're just bringing really inspired filmmakers and having them bring their point of view to things and try to still do something new with them. And for me, that's really satisfying, just seeing again these brilliant people just kind of do their thing, and just being on the sidelines and supporting that and trying to protect them from all the stakeholders, and really just trying to get something off the ground together and kind of facilitating that collaboration.
Yeah, I'd agree. Same as Kyle. Just when you fall in love with a person's project and their vision, just the process of helping them get it made is so rewarding, and it's so tough to get anything made. I'm like shocked, when anything comes out. So just like getting like further and further along in the process without no's is, and even if it is ultimately a no, it's still just a rewarding project to get or process to get to work with someone on their passion project. So yeah, that's probably my favorite part.
Yeah, I agree. It's the pursuit of making cool stuff is always so inspiring. And then with that, you get to work with the people that are the best at what they do. So you really have to be on your game, and it is incredibly inspiring when things are firing on all cylinders. It's hard, you know. Sometimes it feels like it shouldn't be as challenging as it is, but it is because we're all aspiring for a level of greatness. And I think right now is a really fun time in the industry. I think we're coming off a good several year run where things are just different. Certainly in domestic animation, you know, we obviously have the Spider-Verse movies, but there's things like Ninja Turtles, and I mentioned Arcane before, and even the last like Puss in Boots movies, like everybody's sort of pushing the envelope as to what you're used to or what you can expect out of animation. And animation, I think we're all here because you can expect the unexpected, and we can do things, we can do anything that a filmmaker can imagine. So it's all like pushing those, like testing filmmakers to give us something they've never seen before is such a fun and unique challenge. And then the reward of that coming together, which doesn't always happen, but for every time you try, if there's like one thing that's successful, whether it's a small thing or a large thing, it really inspires you to keep going. Because again, you're making cool stuff and hopefully doing something new that people haven't seen before. And that's really cool to be a part of.
Absolutely. I have one question that I probably should have piggybacked it off of the pitching a project moment, but this is a question that came through is, are there any essentials that need to be added to pitch packets that you have, read through and, would give feedback for someone trying to do the same?
We're pretty loose with how we hear things. I think really see pitches like a conversation where, having a sense of the tone, the world, and some characters, but I don't, because it's development, we don't expect you to have everything figured out of the gate. And I think when we say, oh, bring it to us when it's early, that means different things to different people. And, some people are more visual, so that they come at it with more visuals and less words, and they can talk it through. Some people it's the reverse. I will say it's not necessarily one size fits all. It really kind of depends on the project. And I think as far as things to avoid putting in, because again, when we're getting pitches, we're looking to collaborate with you. If you're not an artist and you're a writer, at least for our studio, you shouldn't feel like you need to like hire an artist to like communicate what it's going to look like. I think you can speak to it. If that's more to your strength, you can put a mood board together. I think just being able to like finding a way to communicate it and that like correlates with your own skill set is usually the best way to go about it. I think that also goes to the point of view, and we can understand again how we can be good collaborators, people we can potentially pair you with in the project. But I think I'm going away from the initial part of the question, but as far as like what to include, I think it's really just enough to like communicate your vision, and that's usually just world, characters, and have a sense of kind of the shape of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and oh,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Chelsea. You go.
Mine's so fast. I was just gonna say to emphasize what Kyle is saying, like it's almost better if you don't step by step pitch out the whole plot, because it's kind of a hard thing to listen to, pitched out that way. So if you just hit like some major beats of the plot, like here's what happens act 1, act 2, act 3, or if it's a series, here's what happens in season 1, that's even better than taking us through the whole plot. So don't feel like you have to have that.
Yeah, I would say characters and world are much more important because plot mechanics can change, but if we're falling in love with who we're tracking in a story and where this story takes place, I think that's more important. And then I was just going to throw in, if you're pitching an animated project, and I don't, if I don't immediately get why the project needs to be told in the medium of animation, I will ask that. So the why animated is a really nice thing to know, and it could be simple or it could be a much bigger thing. But knowing why the story must be told in the medium that we tell stories in is super helpful, and it just shows a passion for the medium as well, which we love.
Piggybacking off of that too, I think understanding like what the like high concept is, and when I say high concept, like if you're able to boil down the idea in like a sentence or two, like what is like the elevator pitch? Because like as we talk about it with our team and try to get people excited about it, I think the more gettable it is like that, and being able to find the simplicity in the ideas, because there's a universality in that. Not that the project has to be simple necessarily, but if you were just to describe the project to your friend, how would you describe it if you had like, a minute to do it? I think is something just to think about as you're conceiving it and trying to communicate it.
Fantastic. Great, great answers. We have our first audience question that has come through from Wesley. Wesley says, thank you. First of all, thank you all for hosting this panel and being here. Wesley would love to know what kind of stories inspire you and stick with you, have stuck out to you over your careers, whether in film or outside of film.
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah.
I read a lot, so I don't know. I Moby Dick is pretty sick. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever read that one, but it is so epic, and very personal, and strange. Um, I don't know. I grew up with like Miyazaki movies, and I think those are like for me like the high watermark of. I think everybody kind of goes to what they watched when they were kids, so those for me are like the special ones. And I think why I like those so much is they did feel so specific, and they were worlds I had never seen before, and really fell in love with just the medium through that, and of course like the classic Disney stuff. But for me, like Kiki's Delivery Service is like the all-time best world and best character. I love that kind of stuff, and I feel like that's still a good North Star is that kind of specificity.
Yeah, I mean that speaks to something too that we might have touched on in the previous question, but tone is something that's so important as well. And what are things like? You see a frame of a Miyazaki movie and you know what it is, or even just like you hear about the story and you know it's a Miyazaki movie because obviously they look a certain way, but the themes and the tone, the way they tell the story is so specific. Um, so yeah, I'm not really answering that question, the story question, but yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a blessing to be able to do what we do because we get to watch stuff that we loved growing up. We get to go back to it, and we get to watch a bunch. Like I'm always watching things because that's like sort of my job, and that's fun. It can be overwhelming, but the more I watch things and figure out why movies or films resonate to me, it's always about character and it's always about tone, like the way the story is told and like the universe that own story lives in. Um, that I always sort of go back to those things. Those are the first two things I'm probably looking for when I'm watching stuff. And there are a billion. I could go for days about what I like. So I'll stop. But yeah, I mean, Moby Dick's a pretty good book. It's held up.
He was on one. It was, yeah, what a guy.
I would probably say tone for me too. I feel like anytime like a really interesting new comedy comes out with like a very specific creator's voice, comedic voice, it definitely piques my interest. But like Kyle, like the books of my childhood, I think are like what really got me excited about initially working in animation. And then generally I tend to like dark comedies. I, for whatever reason, always love British stuff. I love female driven stuff and yeah, anything with just like a kind of specific comedic voice, I'd say.
Awesome. We have our next question from Brian. Brian has asked, is a path in production the most common way to transition into development? Or is it actually more difficult to pitch oneself for development roles after being so entrenched in production? I know Kyle and Chelsea, you both, and Kevin, I'm sure like everyone has had some sort of experience with this. So
I'll jump in. I'll say it's actually kind of unusual. I think it's a great listen, however you can break in, whether it's marketing or HR or whatever, you just want to get a foot in the door and then leave it to yourself to kind of break those things open. I think what's been so nice about how SPA conducts its studio is like all the voices are important. So, and we really want to shepherd where people's careers go and really listen to where people want to go. So I think it's somewhat at our studio, it's an interesting path because I think you have access to everybody at the studio from the top down, from Christine, our president, down. And so we really listen to those ambitions that people have, and we're always down to answer questions, whether it's a panel like this or just stop us and ask us to coffee or whatever. I don't think, traditionally in the industry, there's usually a pretty specific path to get into development. Like it's a lot of times just working as an assistant to people that work in creative development. I mean, that just goes for everything. You work for the people you want to eventually have similar jobs to. But that's the usual traditional path is like you work for a creative executive or a development executive or a producer, and you learn how to do their jobs. So then at a certain point, you can be that person, and then you get promoted up. So I do think actually the production path, it's a foot in the door, and it's a huge advantage to know, like, to have that experience and to know how things are actually physically made. I think that Chelsea and Kyle stand out because they have a very 360 understanding about like how the sausage gets made. And when you're giving creative feedback or when you're even just entertaining projects to bring in, it is helpful to know and have an understanding of how, like, what's the possibility of this. It's animation, so anything's possible, but like being able to realistically plot it out is super helpful. And so our development team is lucky to have people like Kyle and Chelsea because they have that well-rounded experience. So the way I'm answering it is it's not a traditional path, but it will help you down the line for sure. And we've all had experience with that.
Just to add on to that, I think, yeah, there is a pretty like linear path, I think, for a lot of people to get into it. But I think our team and teams that have like multitudes of different perspectives only make the development team stronger, just so you've got different voices and different kind of points of views weighing in on things. And I will say, if you're in a job that doesn't directly relate to development, like just doing the kind of extracurricular stuff that development execs do, which is lots of reaching out to artists and kind of building your network and having an understanding of just kind of the creative landscape, I think will help you as you try to position yourself as a development person. I think that was when I was working at Sony in production, I really tried to meet as many artists as possible. And I had friends that worked on projects, and I would read other people's scripts and just kind of try to get my finger on the pulse, even though that wasn't what the day-to-day job was, just so when I was able to make that transition, it was A, easier, and B, when I was interviewing for those types of jobs, I could kind of speak to how I could slot into a development team.
For me, I had in production like been at the coordinator level, and then I had at the company I was at before Sony, I was a creative executive in development for them. And then to work at Sony, I ended up having to be an assistant again, which at the time I was like, oh, like I've already been an assistant for so long, like I don't want to be an assistant again. But it's kind of what I had to do to get my foot in the door at a big studio like Sony, and to, really make the switch from production to development. And in the end, I don't regret it at all. And like Kevin said, it's the best way to learn what development is and how to do it, because you get to see everything that your boss does and they're doing the job. So yeah, I mean, sometimes like it might not feel like forward movement to like make that transition, but if that's what you really want to do, I'd say it's almost always worth it.
great advice. We have another question here from Betty. How much does the marketability, and I don't know if that's a real word, but marketability of a project affect the project's ability to get greenlit?
Marketability is a real world in a real word in Hollywood for sure.
Awesome.
Sorry, Fukuto, were you gonna answer that question? You looked like you were gonna.
Oh, I mean, I think that's like one of the most important things, and that sort of goes to like the high concept, like what if we have to pitch it up the chain, and there's people that are looking in terms of the financials because this is a business, like how do we sell it? And I think understanding, like, I don't think when you bring it in the door, you don't necessarily, we don't expect you to be a marketing exec, but kind of understanding the nuts and bolts of like what things are selling right now and just what the landscape looks like, I think is important. And, I think that's something that we will work on together as well. I think first and foremost, having just the special idea and the special world is where you should come at it. But as we work on it together and we kind of, see how the market changes all the time. So I think to what Kevin was saying earlier about having a vision of what it is being like your focus, and then understanding that there is some compromise and there are things that concessions you might have to make to have it make sense for the market is definitely conversations that'll be had. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting for us, like we sell shows, we're selling shows for the first time. So we are very reliant on what Netflix is looking for, what Amazon is looking for. And I think for us, it's nice because we're not with a single streamer, at least for TV. So it allows us to, there's a lot of different places that are looking for a lot of different things. So we can be pretty, stratified in our approach, but understanding where it's going to sell and what's the right home for it is something that is definitely thought of pretty early on in the development process.
Yeah. Who's the audience and how do we get it to them? And it is we're answering because we work for one of the big Hollywood studios. So yeah, marketing is something that's certainly considered. But like Kyle was mentioning, we're all about the story. We're all about the characters. We want to make something special, and then we'll figure out the rest of it. But it is a factor to think about when you're making a big studio movie or series.
Nothing to add to that.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. What is the greenlight process like? And do you typically lock the scripts in before you can get greenlit for production, or how do you best prepare for production execution?
That's a good question. I think it's probably different at every studio. The way we do it, because we're an animation division sitting under a live action studio, is we are extremely script driven. So our development process usually involves, hiring a writer, getting the script to a really strong place, and then we'll also do some visual development to supplement it. Um, but yeah, for us, it's kind of almost all about the script, and that could take as long as it takes to get the script to be as good as possible. And having been on a movie where we went into production before the script was in a good place, it's hard because animation is such a visual medium and so much of the story is figured out in storyboard reels, and that's such an important part of the process. But I think it's helpful to have a really strong foundation in the script before you start, because then once the train's going, you're paying people, you have people on payroll, and you have a schedule to meet. So in my mind, it's really important to get that strong foundation.
Yeah, especially when our audience, like Chelsea was saying, is people that are used to running a live action studio. So I think there's almost an inherent trust that we will nail the animation of it all. It's just understanding the story, the characters, all that stuff. I feel like I keep saying the same thing, but that's really the blueprint for what it is. And then usually in a green light process, we'll have some visual development, like Chelsea was saying, whether it's like individual frame. Sometimes we'll do like some style frames that show like a key moment in a movie that may be fully rendered or painted to look like the final frame in a movie. all of that stuff is helpful to visualize because yes, story, but also obviously a very visual medium. And so understanding like what it will look like really gives that sort of rounded out point of view. Sometimes we'll storyboard a sequence or a little chunk of something just so we can express tone even further. Because so much of that comes out, and then so much of it is figured out as you're doing storyboards and visual development. But yeah, to give a really clear understanding of what the movie is and can be, it's helpful to have a pretty solid script. Because then, like Chelsea was saying, then in all success, they'll say, "Great, we love that movie. Go make it, and we need it in 3 years to be before this or whatever." If your script isn't on solid ground, then you'll find yourself sort of back to square one. So there's a lot of things to sort of consider there, but yeah, script is important to us for sure.
Anything to add, Kyle?
No, it was stated so eloquently.
Awesome. All right, our next question is from Haley. Haley says, thank you again for all of you for being here and for this panel. Haley's wondering how you find new creatives or writers to work within development on your team.
A great question. I mean, that's like a large focus of like what our team is artist outreach. And, there's so many different ways. We have an amazing recruiting team that are connected with all the universities, all the art schools. So there's so much amazing talent kind of coming up through that. Um, so yeah, through those sources, through social media, we have really good relationships with different reps. So usually we find writers through submissions from management and agencies. So we're reading all of the time, circulating scripts, and then you kind of just build your network from there. You get recs from people. And I think, again, a large part of our job is just meeting with people generally and just kind of hitting it off. It doesn't have to even be, there's not usually agenda for those meetings outside of just like, hey, like we're doing cool stuff and you're cool. Like, let's see if we can, collaborate. So again, just having those kind of natural, just making friends with people is a large focus for every development team.
Yeah, there's so much artists it's easier for us to access artists now too with social media and certain things. And so people are able to make films on their own a lot easier now. And so, we try to stay on top of just everything. And we meet once a week and always email each other, us and the three of us in our larger group. And so we're always making sure that everybody's watching the coolest stuff. Because now and the ability to work with people all over the world now too, whether it's because of Zoom or whatever. Um, there's just access points and there's so many places to find stuff. I think, Instagram, like finding artists all the time on that is really great. And so, and then you can just reach out. And like Kyle said, we have an amazing talent recruiting team that we could forward them a link and say, have you seen the short film? And then a week later they'll be like, okay, they're gonna come in and meet with everybody at Spa. Like that's the coolest thing ever. So there's a lot of places to get discovered now, and there's lots of ways to just even be able to make stuff that will get you noticed. It's a very, very exciting time in terms of like finding talent.
Absolutely.
I don't
Okay.
think I have anything to add to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. Our next question comes from Basil. Within development, how long does the viz dev process take, and can it make or break a project?
Yes. It just depends. I mean, like so in development, it will obviously it's not never ending because there's a certain amount of time and budget that you want to allocate to a project to find out if it's really working. But we'll spend anywhere from a year to however long just really trying to find those specific things. Now, once a project gets into pre-production, production, that's a whole different thing. But in development, it's tough to say, just like trying to find a story and trying to find a script, like sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it takes years just to figure things out. And then you sort of want to let story lead a little bit in terms of what you're trying to visualize. So you just have to be smart of it. So sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 years to figure out the visual development language, but you have less people working on it because that's sort of what the project requires. So it's a difficult question to answer, but it is obviously like super duper important. We might be able to get a project greenlit and moved forward without a ton of visual development, but obviously it's a big thing, and it's a big thing for us. Like when we decide the projects we want to work on, we're always thinking about how can we push the envelope with what you can see. And what's nice about working at our studio is we don't have a house style. So, Spider-Verse looks different than Hotel Transylvania does, than Mitchell's does. And they're all unique in their own way, and they're all pretty amazing. And that's always the goal. But what's nice is it's sort of a blank slate from where we start, if we're doing something original for the first time. So sometimes, that can take a while, and we're willing to put the resources into that because that's how I think we stand out as a studio.
Awesome. Okay. Our last question, believe it or not, is coming from Adrian. If you could go back in time, to when you were just starting out and give yourself advice based on what you know now, what would you say?
I think for me, it's like, don't compare yourself to other people, especially like, I don't know, right? When I was starting out, I'd be like, oh man, like I'm 24 and this person's 24 and they're here and I'm there. And why am I not there? I'm here. And it's just like, I don't know, everyone has like kind of their own path to things. And I know Kevin had mentioned that, and it's right that there is generally a linear path to get into development, but I think we're all examples of different ways to get there. And I think for me, I mean, you can have a mono-focus goal, like Ahab and Moby Dick, but I think sometimes for me, it's good to have a lot of like a spectrum of things. And even now, it's like there's not like one thing I'm necessarily going for. And understand there's like a few different good paths for me, and not being so hung up on one way of getting there, and kind of just putting my head down and enjoying the experience. Yeah.
It's pretty good.
For
Go,
me,
Chelsea.
I very similar to Kyle, just like don't like get caught up in like expectations in your head of where you think you should be at a certain point or something like that. Just like get in, meet people, soak up as much as you can, learn as much as you can, and just figure it out from there, because what you want to do might change a million times. And sometimes myself and I see others like holding out off on taking a job or something because it's not exactly what they want to do. Um, or yeah, exactly what they want to do. And I would say don't worry too much about that. Like kind of just get your foot in the door, and then you'll meet people. Always be vocal about what it is you're interested in, and that way people will know how to help you.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be nice to everybody. If somebody wants to take a meeting with you, you do it because you would hope that people would extend the same courtesy. You know, I think, uh, especially in animation, like what I found, I was saying earlier that I fell into it, and I didn't know if I was going to stay in animation when I first took the job. But as soon as I got into it, I immediately realized, okay, a bunch of like-minded people, and most of the people in the industry are very kind and um, wanting to inspire people to do a good job and be what they are. I think animation is really great because it's one of those like all boats rise situations where we work for a studio, and our rival studios, if they do great and if their movies perform, it only helps all of us. And that's one of the fun things about being in the business and being on the side of things. So I think you'll find that people are really nice and forthcoming and willing to share their experience and give you guidance. And so I got a lot of that in my career, and so I tried to like repay that favor with everybody I meet. Um, so sometimes it's like sometimes it's like your schedule's so crazy or whatever, but I do try to make time for like anybody that's even interested in what I do or the medium I work in, because I think if you have smart, nice, kind people, then it just continues to be a fun place to make cool stuff.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing answer to that question, but also just an amazing panel. So that concludes our panel for today, everybody. Thank you so much for the amazing questions. Big shout out to Kevin, Kyle, and Chelsea for being here and sharing their knowledge with us today. If we didn't get to your questions, please don't worry. The recruiting team at Sony has been collecting everybody's questions, and we will use them for future recruiter tips on the Sony Pictures Animations LinkedIn page. So be sure to follow them there. And so this panel concludes the Sony Pictures Animation 2024 Summer Speaker Series. Thank you all so much for attending this talk and any previous sessions we've hosted as well. We're getting a lot of love in the chat. So again, thank you so much, Kevin, Kyle, and Chelsea for being here today. And so everyone, please look out for next year's Summer Speaker Series in 2025. But until then, thank you so, so much. Goodbye. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Thank you
Andrea.
all. Thanks for having us.